you guys so much for coming out to be a part of this. My name is Zach Petrock.
My name is Dylan Ekron.
My name's Alina Wooten.
My name is Sergio Caballero.
All right. That's good. So we want to keep this really informal, so if you guys have questions throughout, please feel free to raise your hand. And if I don't see you, maybe Paul can keep looking as well. Yes, you have a question, Paul.
I'm your assistant.
Oh, thank you. Very good. You're my C3PO. So, again, my name is Zach, and I'm a studio department lead at Disney Animation Studios. And just a quick look at my filmography here. You'll notice that it actually skips a few. So between Ralph and Big Hero, it skipped Frozen. And between Big Hero and Moana, we skipped Zootopia. So what happens when you're at Disney, we do all our films internally, and it takes about 5 years to develop one. So as one is ramping down, if you're on it to the bitter end, then the other one's already in full swing. So you actually have to jump ahead and go on to that next one out that's just beginning. So we are a studio of about 900 people, 750 of which are artists, engineers, and production support. So what that means is that we are all in this building, which is kind of amazing because the entire team that creates these films is right there. So from the first floor to the top floor, if you have a question, you can find the person that has the answer in this building. That's a really unique thing, especially in this day and age, the way visual effects and other animation is happening. So we're really proud of that fact. So we recently released this one, which is called Zootopia. Thank you. That was this spring. And then our next feature is Moana, and this is coming out this fall, and we're just wrapping it up right now. And I have to say, the environments and the lighting in this are amazing. It's such a beautiful film. I'm really proud of the way this one turned out. So at Disney, we strive for a couple things: compelling stories, believable worlds, and appealing characters. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we progress. So again, if you think back to that filmography, I actually skipped Zootopia. So we are going to be covering Zootopia today, but what I'm going to do is take a step back. And if you don't mind, I'm going to pull back the curtain and let you guys see how we actually make these films at Disney and give you a little bit of an overview of the philosophies that we utilize. And then these guys are going to get into the specifics and show you some really cool ZBrush techniques, tips and tricks, and all that great stuff. So these are, we have the director Byron Howard and Rich Moore from Zootopia, and then Clark Spencer, the producer. These are the folks that kind of spearhead that effort at the studio. So we wanted to do something a little different with Zootopia. And if we look back to our legacy at Disney, we've had animals in an animal world behaving like humans. We've had animals in a human world. We've had animals acting like humans in a human world. But Zootopia is something new. This is a world where humans never existed. And I wanted to throw this slide in there just to give you guys a scope of some of the challenges that we've faced. Thinking about the amount of species we had to model. There were 64 different species. And then the other really difficult component of this was scale. So you have a tiny little mouse, if you look behind his tail there, the predator's tail, all the way up to a huge giraffe. So these are things that really that were really difficult that we had to utilize ZBrush to overcome, and they're going to talk more about the specifics of that. One other quick note on a more global scale, if you notice, there's a collar around that predator in the middle, with a little beeper there. At one point in time, that was a very important part of the story. But as we're going to talk about, our stories evolve because we make them all internally. We evolve it as we are producing them. And those kind of changes are things that we all have to take into account, and they impact what we're doing. So, how many of you guys have heard of the concept of 10,000 hours? Right? It's kind of out there now. So there's something a little bit new, a little bit more refined that speaks to that same idea. And it's called deliberate practice. So the idea is that it's not just putting in 10,000 hours that's going to make you an expert at something. It's what you do during that 10,000 hours. So I can explain that, but I want to start with a little example from Nick here.
Hey, carrots, you're going to wake the baby. I got to get to work.
This is important, sir. I think your $10 worth of popsicles can wait.
Ha! I make $200 a day, Fluff. 365 days a year since I was 12. And time is money. Hop along.
All right, so what Nick is saying is that he's been doing this his entire adult life, right? But what he's not telling you is how he was doing it, and that's really what's important. The reason I bring this up is that before ZBrush, you could not deliberately practice sculpting digitally, right? You could, but it was so difficult. You were spending so much time in the nuances of how the software worked that you couldn't actually sculpt. So when you're picking a point and you're pulling it, and then you're deselecting, you're picking the next point and pulling it, you're not focusing on what's important. You're not focusing on the sculpting. So this was actually a huge revelation in the industry. Just to give you a little bit of history here, this is one of my first digital sculpts on your left. That's something called a sock puppet head. I don't know, any of you guys ever heard of that or seen that? That's old school. So it's all NURBS. It's one surface. You start inside the mouth with a little hole, and then you extrude it out so it goes out of the mouth and wraps all the way back around over the head. So and then you put the lines in there to try to push and pull these forms. Like, how terrible is that for trying to figure out gesture and rhythm and all the things that are extremely important and appeal in a character? And then it kind of moved on a little bit to this idea of patch modeling, where you had to make these little squares of NURBS patches to make up the form that you're trying to create. And then you had to worry about the tangency of those points. Terrible, terrible things that kept us from being able to do deliberate practice. So now ZBrush comes along. That throws everything out the window. But now you have the opposite scenario, where you can do anything. So how do you as an artist hone in and decide what's important to focus on? What kind of deliberate practice are you going to do? So these are more examples of that type of deliberate practice, looking at how they're doing something over and over and over again. Ideally, you would want to do this for several years to truly master something. But what they are doing is looking at a goal, identifying it, and then working towards it. So this gets a little tricky when we're doing these things. You know, lunch crunches, right? You guys have heard of those. They're very popular right now. Yeah, and they're cool. But is a lunch crunch deliberate practice? I say maybe. So what happens is we work in a narrative medium. Film, comic books, graphic novels, some games. It's all driven by story. Story is a key element in what we're doing. So if you are doing a lunch crunch and you don't have a story attached to your goal, is that the best deliberate practice you can be doing? Anybody know who this is? Anybody recognize? Not you, Dylan. Anybody recognize this character? This is Wreck-It Ralph. Anybody know who this is? Right, Wreck-It Ralph. And this one? There you go. And this one? Wreck-It Ralph. And this one? Wreck-It Ralph. So there was a point in our process, we're again developing it all internally, we didn't know what that story was. So at that point, it made sense for Bill Schwab, the artist behind all these drawings, to go in and deliberately practice his skills of developing a character that could tell a different story. But I'll tell you what, as soon as you know what that story is, then that should become the driving factor of your design choices. Everything you're doing in ZBrush should revolve around that. A simple example, if they said, okay, Wreck-It Ralph is now going to be a creature that comes up from underground and wrecks things. You have these two choices, this one or this one. For me, it becomes much more obvious which one you would choose, right? This one. For me, this guy clearly doesn't live underground. It's just their innate understandings of what this character implies that say, compared to this guy, that doesn't fit the story as well. So story becomes that driving force. Another example, anybody notice anything slightly out of the ordinary with this slide? So this is from Big Hero, looking at Wasabi. Now this was just some random failed render, but if you look at his hair, it's probably not behaving the way we wanted it to behave in the final film. What's interesting about that is the fact that he has dreadlocks, and I will tell you why. This is one of the original design concepts for Wasabi on your left. That's by Shiyun. And then this is a design sculpt by Stefano Dubé. So again, that deliberate practice makes sense for us to go in there and do a design sculpt because we thought we knew what we were after. So Wasabi is very suave and calm and collected, and his clothing is heavily influenced by the Japanese culture of San Francisco. So as we're developing these films, there came a point where that all went out the window. We decided we needed to completely change what defined these characters. It was actually too complex. You had all these elements happening in the film. You had all these secondary characters. They were too complex. So we thought we need to pare it down and make it a little more of a simple read, and then get a character trait that can also add opportunities for humor. So they said, all right, I've got it. Let's make Wasabi a hypochondriac. Let's make him someone that is afraid of germs, a germaphobe. It's an easy, simple thing to get. It's going to afford opportunities for jokes. Okay, great, let's do that. As soon as we said that, the next sentence out of someone's mouth was, okay, we have a germaphobe with dreadlocks who never washes his hair. Okay, what do you do with that? So we started that design process over again. And you're right in the middle of the film, you're in production, it's already rigged, it's already textured, everything's already happening. So we tried to take a step back and say, what can we do here? So we took off the dreads, but when you design something the right way, it works as a whole, right? So when we took those dreads off, it didn't make sense. The design just wasn't as appealing, it fell apart. So we ended up kind of landing on a hybrid area with this guy. So this is the Wasabi you see in the film. He's got a much more reserved look, a little bit of a Carlton from the Fresh Prince kind of thing going on, and a little bit shorter on those dreads. And then we just said, you know what, let's just push it out there and hope for the best, because that's what we can do. And actually, I hope up to this point, no one actually thought of that right in the middle of the movie and thought, this is it, I'm walking out, right? Okay, is research important? So a lot of people ask me, do I have to research everything I'm going to sculpt in ZBrush? And the answer is actually no. It's just like my dentist told me, you don't have to brush all your teeth, only the ones you want to keep. So you don't have to research everything, only the stuff you want to look good. So we do an exorbitant amount of research at Disney, and it's actually fantastic and fascinating and enlightening to the entire process and to the story. So we went to the Wild Animal Kingdom and the San Diego Zoo and looked at all these different animals. You look at how they run, how they move, everything about them. Then we actually sent a small team to Kenya on a safari, and they got to see how these animals were interacting in the wild with one another. And that actually directly influenced the story, and that was something they really latched onto. So if this wouldn't have happened, the story would not be what it is today. So not only do we have to look at the whole, everything that's happening with these animals as they move, we want to get up close and look at the fur, look at the color, look at the texture, look at how it clumps together, how it moves. We'll bring in animals when we can. And you can go see it and get a little email and say, hey, there's a warthog here. If you want to see it, come down to the caffeine patch. So I want to take that idea of research and talk about something we mentioned a couple years ago when we were here for Big Hero. The smaller is to the greater. I want to talk about those two things now combining. We're going to elevate this stuff, right? We'll take it a little bit further. As a refresher, this is a design philosophy. The smaller is to the greater as the greater is to the whole. So what we're talking about is that leaf. Look at the veins in the leaf, the smaller, to the greater branch. So the veins echo the shape of the branch as the greater, and the greater is to the whole. The shape of those branches echo the trunk of the tree, right? It's something that happens in nature. It's a really fundamental design philosophy. So looking at that in conjunction with this research they were doing, like these rock formations in China, they look like skyscrapers. It almost looks like a city already, and it has the beautiful depth of field and these things that are happening. So they're looking at how all these natural forms relate to one another within that world, and then how that's going to impact the design. We also did a lot of research on organic architecture, so some Gaudi work in there, just looking at the really beautiful shapes and thinking about the fact that these animals exist with a world with no humans. So what kind of buildings would they build? What would those look like? There's some really beautiful images in here, just some even thoughts. If you think about a pine cone, and how that's structured, and then think about blowing that up to the scale of an apartment building. You know, it's such a great starting point for a design philosophy when you're going to build a world around nature and around animals. So we have an example here of how those ideas are coming together. So if you look in this next shot, you'll see the building, see those Gaudi shapes. It's obvious now when you look at them, those round shapes. Looking at the sprinklers, they're made out of pipes that look like trees. Those are all deliberate choices. In the opening part, if you look at the stilts that hold up the bridge, they're tree branches, right? This is all happening in the jungle. There are reasons behind all those things, and this is how they're all coming together. Same thing with this sequence. Look at, you have repeated horn shapes. You have some of those pine cone element ideas and some of the Gaudi architecture and structures. The horn shapes on top of the train station. Right? I really love this sequence because it was one of the most difficult things that we've had to go through thus far as a studio. It came in as an idea very late in the process. And if you look back at this, there are maybe 7 or 8 sets here that are used one time in this movie. Some of these sets you see for 1 second, 2 seconds at the most. But look at the level of detail and attention to design idea that's happening in these. So I really think that speaks a lot to the commitment the studio has to doing these things with as much passion as possible. Another concept we've talked about before, straights to curves, right? So reviewing that again, and then we're going to look at that in context of the film, of the story. So if you look at Clawhauser's back on the far left side, a nice, long, straight curve. Then look at how that's juxtaposed with the rolls of his belly and his leg. So setting up a rhythm, setting up a straight to curve. All these are the same. It's interesting. If you look at the straights that are happening on that side relative to the curve, the large fat roll that he's accentuating there, it's really kind of an amazing idea. And then let's take a look at a sample from the film, how you take that same philosophy and apply it to storytelling, scene creation. You don't have to have sound to see this, but it would help. Is it? Okay. That's all right. So, again, looking at the opening of this scene, it's calm. Their postures are actually very straight. Even her ears are straight. Everything about it is that side of the spectrum. They're having a conversation. They're outside. It's a natural event. They get to that door, that archway. As soon as they get inside, things go south of cheese. Right? Everything becomes a curve and a diagonal. Even the light is not straight. It's at a strong diagonal. Look at the arch of his back as the predator is arched over and moving. Everything about the animation is set up in a completely different way that will juxtapose the straights that they set up at the beginning. So again, just that idea, I guess you could even say smaller is to the greater, looking at it as it applies to our films, looking at straights to curves on the character scale, how that same idea applies on a global scale to the straights and curves of a scene. Okay, I think this is my last crazy concept here. But MVP, who's heard of this one before? Yeah, that's not you.
Most valuable player.
I think you guys have heard of MVP before, right? All right, who? Anyone out there? Raise a hand. Come on, help us all. That's right. Minimum viable product. So what does that mean? It means that as you're going through these things, you want to put the minimum amount of effort into your creation to get feedback. And that's where ZBrush is so fundamentally important, because I almost feel like that's what it's been designed to do. That's how we utilize it at Disney for our design sculpt process that they'll get into. What you're doing is you're taking what your minimum effort you can put into something is to gather feedback. We do that at a global scale in the form of something we call screenings. So internally, we talked a little bit about these films evolving at certain points. We have a minimum of 7 screenings. What that means is that we'll make the film from start to finish, the same film, 7 times. And we screen it. So we have a little theater in-house, and we'll invite people from the staff to come in and watch it. And then it plays, and then you're asked to give notes. What didn't work for you? What did you like? What character arcs didn't make sense? So we have a little example of that here. And you might remember this from the film. It stayed in the film, made it all the way to the final. So it's in effect the same scene. It's accomplishing the same thing that you see in the final film. But what this is a minimum viable product representation of that idea. It's a lot faster to do these drawings and animate them than it is to build all these sets, to texture them all, to rig everything, to light it. And you can see they'll even test gags, and we see if people laugh when these things are happening. And the cool thing about this process is that as it evolves, so they'll start off as all storyboards. These are just storyboards. And they'll start from the beginning to end at storyboard. And then what we'll do as we evolve these scenes, as we get characters built, as things start to stick and go into production, then we'll just slowly replace them. We'll just start to replace them with layout, like temp, rough lighting. So always keeping it to that minimum viable product to make sure it's working. Never jumping right to the end and saying, okay, that I think it works. Let's just go straight for the end of the whole thing and finish it up. We always take these little incremental steps. And just a little closer to that, why we do that. I think you guys have all, you come back into work on a Monday and someone else saw the movie that you maybe want to see. You ask them how it was. I'm thinking of seeing that. How was it? Well, as soon as they say, well, the effects were good, or well, Scarlett and Thor were sexy, you know what they're really saying is like, it was okay. Well, probably it wasn't a great movie. But you never hear anyone say, well, the story was good. If the story's good, the movie is good, right? Story can carry bad visual effects. Bad visual effects can rarely carry story. So, in conclusion, just to wrap up my part here, I think just on a personal note, I have one, like a simple little goal. All I want to do is just completely revolutionize our industry. That's it. And I want to find a way that artists like yourselves can build a following and get funding to do the art and stories you're passionate about. And I think I might have found a way to do that. So if that sounds interesting to you, and if you guys want to hear more crazy rants like I just went through, let's talk. So I'm on Twitter at Zach Petrock. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, my name is Dylan, and I've been at Disney since Wreck-It Ralph. It was my first film that I got to work on there, and I've had the opportunity to work on a wide range of different types of characters and things. My first model ever at Disney was a napkin, but I got to work on a toenail this morning, so straight up. So I want to talk a little bit about, and I added some animation to my slideshow, so. I want to talk a little bit about how some of that research and all of that thought process goes into actually putting our characters on the screen and through the process of building our design. So I'll start with this slide here, because this is my main contribution to Zootopia, was the tiger dancers. So I felt like that was a pretty good one. So for Zootopia, we didn't want to just take an animal and upright them and call it, that's our stylization. So, there's a ton more thought process and work and research that goes into that. So, we wanted to keep the animalistic natures of all of these characters and find a way to bring that into this anthropomorphized world that they live in. And so in order to do that, it's not just a one-to-one comparison of taking a human and having them walk on all fours, or taking a dog and having that stand on two legs, but you can see that there's a lot of similar mechanisms at work there. So, how do you kind of put that together? You get your Corey Loftus out and you make him design the characters for the movie. So that took care of all of our problems. So here's a really good example of just like one of those fundamental things, just like an overall kind of guideline for the characters that we work on for Zootopia. So, and that was just like, how do they move? How do they fundamentally move? Because all of our characters had to be able to switch back and forth from walking upright, picking up cups and stuff, to being able to go into like this feral sort of animalistic mode. So, a lot of that comes into the anatomy, how these characters are actually constructed. And it's not just the same as a human being would be upright. So this slide shows how, all of our characters have sort of like this centralized pivot point in their arms. So their whole arm sort of moves along this axis instead of having sort of this double axis that we have as people. And so like that kind of stuff goes a long way towards, you don't maybe immediately pick up on it when you see the movie, but it's what makes our characters feel like they're animals still, the way that they move. So it's not just the way that they're animated, it's fundamentally how they're constructed. So here's another kind of breakdown of that. So, it was decided pretty early on that having the animals kind of have sort of a hunch to their stance, like a little bit of a bend in their knee, just went a long way towards saying this isn't a guy in a suit. Right, and you might be noticing some of the terminology and stuff that's on these. There are a whole vernacular of character objects and things were created, but you can see like just no squishy butts, for example, on the animals made them feel like not people in suits. So here's that's just like a fundamental kind of guideline that we use for every single character, and you can see there's a huge variety of characters in this that all follow that sort of guideline. So this is just a bunch of legs. Pants, that was another huge design decision on Zootopia, obviously, and for anybody. All right, so like I mentioned briefly vernacular, right? So we have a fur system in Zootopia where we had to be able to have all these different parted off the pieces of fur and stuff like that. So we have all kinds of different mapped out terminology for that type of stuff. But this keeps the whole team in sync as far as like which pieces are we talking about here. So when someone says the drumsticks need to be adjusted, or the fatulas. So kind of along that same route is, we think of every single component of our characters, of course. And so, teeth is something that will how much reuse of these teeth can we get? How many different types of animals do we have? And then can we like apply those to different characters? And we're trying to minimalize, but also get the most use out of the things that we build.
And just to add to that, we found that using one set of teeth pretty much covered the range of all of these different teeth, which was pretty impressive.
Yeah, because a lot of it can be sculpted around and just be like a variant of that. And Sergi, I think, is going to talk a little bit more about that kind of thing. So let's get back to the important stuff, the tiger dancer. So, all right. So yeah, this is a great example of how we apply this animal anatomy, and something that would be very, very difficult to do if we didn't have tools like ZBrush to do it, because we're able to just go in and sculpt on pretty much the final model. And this was new for me. I've never made an animal character like this before. So being able to jump into ZBrush and sculpt up and kind of discover those forms and things underneath as I go is hugely important to the workflow. If you can, all this stuff had to be sculpted up in a way that we could immediately rig it and then test it to see if it's going to actually deform the way that it needs to, because there's not two different versions of these characters. They need to be able to do both. And being able to have the color and stuff applied really quickly helps with finding these characters as fast as possible. So that's our workflow for that. This is a good example of the typical types of notes and things that we would get in a workflow. So back and forth with character designers and just figuring out exactly how long different things need to be. This is actually after I think animation got a hold of it, and they were actually putting these characters into their animalistic type of forms, and seeing what needed to change proportionally. Here's a great BOGO sculpt by Brandon Lawless, and just again that muscular overlay there. You can see the same types of shapes reoccurring on all these different characters. And then this is a yak. Is it a yak by Suzanne Kim? And so this was.
Wildebeest.
Oh yeah, wildebeest. Sorry. And so just the depth of exploration and then how that applies to a character that is standing on two legs. And later on in the movie you see these characters in scenes where there's hundreds and hundreds of them, and like their similarity sort of becomes a like comedic point, or something that sort of helps define them as a character, because we're using that research of all these animals and herds and how they interact, to bring that into the movie in a really successful way. This is the same character model, actually, and the only thing that's different is like some of the head stuff that's going on there, obviously, but reusing the same types of shapes, very beneficial to our workflow. And then there's the voice talent that we get in the show, the different movies, is it's kind of interesting because they actually sometimes have a say in the way that their characters look. And we always try to insert like little pieces of their personality. As the designs go along through the film, you'll see that they'll start to become like little elements of them sort of are, physically start to represent the actual voice talents that do it. So I know that Gazelle had some heavily influenced notes from Shakira when she was working on the movie. It's pretty interesting. So here you can see like just a couple of minor alterations to our characters. It goes a long ways towards giving us a huge variety. This is all just like look variants and different horns. So the way that we approach making characters, we'll get usually a design like this, sometimes not even this much of a turnaround. So maybe it'll be like one angle. This character was lucky. So we'll take this and into ZBrush, do a sculpt up of our character, and then that goes back into design where we get draw-overs or any kind of additional note. They might notice something once it translates into 3D. But the point is all of this happens very, very quickly. And so it's nice to be able to work that fast, especially in new territory like these animal characters. And so you can see how all of that research and thought goes into creating such a huge, diverse cast of characters that don't feel like guy in a suit and don't feel like, they live in the same world. Yeah, hippo in a suit. That was good timing. Gerbils in suits. Okay, so most of them are wearing suits. But you get the point, right? We're not making like mascot guys. And that is our character process.
So I had a couple quick questions from online. Is there a polygon limit to the characters that you use and make in ZBrush?
There's not.
No polygon limit. All right.
Unlimited.
And then I had a question from Ricardo. When do you think artists are ready to apply to Disney? And where were you in your life or art when you did get the first job at Disney? Open to anybody on the panel.
Do you want to field that one, Dylan?
Where was I in my life?
You just graduated from Noman.
Yeah, I actually just finished up Noman, and I did some like freelance art around for a while, and then applied through the talent development program at Disney, which is a great program that they do, where you get to come in and bug a bunch of people that are way better than you, and basically learn how to work in a production at the same time that you are learning all the ropes and getting acquainted to that studio environment. So that was a really cool experience.
Excellent. Alina, you're up.
Hi, guys. I probably know a lot of you guys from Facebook, but hi. Yeah. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more in depth of the process of how we create characters and how we work closely with the designer and ZBrush in general. ZBrush is definitely something that I work in about 80-90% of the time. So my first movie was Frozen, and I worked on Beast and Big Hero 6, Zootopia, and Moana. That's coming out soon. So when we get the designs, like Dylan had mentioned, we go through all of the references of the character, anatomy, and all that. But when we get the drawing, it's usually a 3/4 view, one drawing usually, of the character. And he draws it like this with one arm up so that it's informative to what's happening underneath the arm and how the arm is actually shaped. So it's really informative in that way. It's simple design, so we just take that and start working with it. And I'll show you some of the other characters that he drew. Fennec, who was done by Suzanne Kim. A pose of hops, And sometimes we get poses to like really feel for the character and see what type of character or personality they have. And so it's really helpful to sculpt. And here's one character that Brandon Lawless worked on. Here's a design draw-over of him. And usually when we get the drawovers, that becomes the new design. We don't like go back and forth trying to hit the original design because we're, like he said, we're in a tight process, so we need to move forward as fast as possible. So ZBrush does allow us to manipulate the character in a way where we can move forward and get notes, and then that would be the new design. And Swinton was a character that was one of the main characters in the film. That was the villain. Believe it or not, but they changed it to Bellwether, which is the sheep. And so as I was working on her, the story design changed, and she ended up becoming the cop that you see at the end of the film in prison. And I'll show you a little bit of how we started with her. She's interesting because there's 3 ways we kind of started characters. One was a universal topology where we had a topology for paws, a topology for claws, topology for 3-fingered and hooved animals. And sometimes we'll take pieces and put it together to make the character, or we'll start from scratch, or we'll use one topology that's created for that character. And this one was taken for pieces and pieces. So I took Nick's head, I cut off his muzzle, and sculpted a snout. And the reason why I used his is because I knew that he was further along and developed, and the way that he was working with blend shapes and movement. So I was like, okay, I'm going to start with him. He has the big ears, the pig ears, and everything. And then I said, well, he has a round body, so I'm going to use that because it'll help with the body. And this is the magic. So basically, it's a pig, sheep, fox kind of character that I just kind of mashed around. And then from here, I would work with a rigger or whatever and see whether or not they want to change the topology, because this was a unique topology. And once we got the unique topology ready, then that would be the topology that we use for all the pig characters. If you have any questions, you can answer. Yeah.
I got some online questions for you here. How long do you spend on like one character? How much time?
As Zootopia continued on, we had more limited time, I guess. But typically it was like, 3 days to a week sometimes?
For the first pass.
For the first pass, and then 2 weeks in general, but...
Yeah, it can vary greatly as
Yeah.
well. On Moana in the beginning, you might spend, well, when you're looking at the entire process, you probably spend 4 months on a character, but you don't do that straight. You'll put a couple weeks in and get with the designer and work through it, and then it'll go off into rigging and you'll get everyone else's input as you're working on another one, and then you'll just juggle changes as they come back in.
So that's a good leading question for Torba. It was asking, were there characters that were completely scrapped because their designs didn't work in 3D?
No, actually.
No?
No, they were all
They
motivated.
were all
If
used.
anything was scrapped, it was motivated by story change.
Any questions out there?
What type of changes normally riggers ask of you when you're modeling a character?
Always about topology flow, the alignment of the limbs, alignment of the edge loops. We try to keep the topologies more or less at the same density on the different areas, so mainly of the times it's more about the cleanup process of that mesh. And because also we, in other productions, and even in Zootopia, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, we tend to use a kind of U-body, a universal mesh, so it's a mesh that we know that it's going to work with well on the rigging department. So normally all the notes came from, can you make this like a bit straight or something like that? No big things.
And I think I did have one where we were making a bear, and a lot of the animals on Zootopia, they had kind of like a squat position.
Oh, yeah.
And so we had to, we modeled it in the squat position. I'll show you a couple of the characters. that were in the squat position that we put into the model, you know, and then sent it off, and then it came back saying, oh, we want the legs completely straight up, so that in the animation they would squash it there.
The legs was a tricky part because we wanted to keep that design shape that Corey provides, but at the same time we want to make the riggers work a little bit easier, so we have to strike the limbs. And
this is we usually do a kind of a mock-up painting and this type of layout to show directors once it's approved by the designer and art team and stuff to get the buy-off, so that way we can clean up and do all that stuff for production.
We got another question right over here. Over here.
Hi, I'm probably skipping a little bit ahead, but if it's in the presentation somewhere. But how much, like you were talking about templating pieces like teeth and using them to make the process a little bit faster. How much of that was also used in other processes, like for example fur? Were you able to also reuse fur templates, for example, for the same species, or using same looking fur for other types of species, like how you merged, for example, pig, ferret pieces to make that model?
Well, we weren't. We only built the proxies, which is like kind of like a shape reference for the other department who does do the fur, and it does help because when we reuse the same topology, it helps them transfer the maps and stuff for them. But they have to change the color and everything for different species and stuff. But it does give them a starting point.
Our look department does the fur and most hair, so they do build upon their past experience and assets that they create.
but in terms of the shape of the body and the fur, Zootopia was interesting because on that level we had to provide two meshes, the body without the fur, and how it will be the proxy, or what will be the volume that the grooming should hit for the final concept or the final approval.
And here's the design of BOGO that Brandon Lawless worked on. And then this was used for the arm. And then you can see kind of how it turned out in the sculpt.
You got another question here on the floor?
Hey guys, kind of a two-part question. Knowing that you guys have the universal rig, are you guys the heads and bodies always stay together, or do you ever separate the head from the rig for animation purposes? And also, then are you doing blend shapes, or is it all the shapes for the mouths done with the rig?
So yeah, we in the past have a separate head for animation just for that purpose, for rigging, to do it a lot easier. And then we often supply blend shapes for mouths and eyes and everything else, but we work very closely with the rigging department. And it really depends. Some shapes are just much more difficult than others, and they're just better addressed in ZBrush. And some shapes are just more technical, and they're better addressed with the rig. So it's really just up to that teaming of artists to decide which route they'd like to go.
And we do work really closely with one another, so it's not just like we don't own just like one part of it. We work closely with Sim and closely with Look and try to suit their needs as well as the model. So this is another character that I got to work on. He was obviously a bigger role, but then got now he's just a hippo that comes out of the subway and dries off in the suit. So generic pig, Higgins to generic pig. And we do the same anatomy structure underneath the clothing and then get the drawovers, and that's with the clothing, and get the buy-off with the director. And then Lionheart, we did one sculpt without the mane and then one sculpt with the mane, and that was used to as a proxy to give to the SEM department for reference. And then drawovers on that, both with and without the mane. And then we also line them up with the main characters if we know that they're going to interact with the main characters to make sure that's going to fit in the film correctly. So we have to scale them accordingly, and we usually do all the scaling, and I do all the scaling in ZBrush so that everything's lined up and then match it in Maya. And this is something that he was talking about earlier, where this is an older version, and because of the story changes, we had to redesign the character because the director really wanted it to be more dopey looking. So Brandon Lawless did the first pass at it, and like the wildebeest, they liked the body. They were like, the body's fine, but let's just make the head a little bit more dopey. So I got the chance to work on this guy, made him more dopey looking, just the head, but used the same topology and everything, just mashed him around to a different shape. And that's Flash that you see in the film. And then Kozlov was one of these characters that I used a universal mesh that Sergey started. It was a bear, a different, completely structured bear, but, and I'll show you how I started with him. Again, he's wearing the collar that was an older design, so he did change a little bit in the movie. So drawovers that we get. And then the clothed version, it was like a mobster. He was supposed to be the, what is it, the mobster instead of the yeah.
The Godfather.
Yeah, he was supposed to be the Godfather, but ended up getting the background treatment again.
You got another question over here, down the middle. Down the middle.
Oh, hi.
There I am. I move quick, not really.
You keep mentioning a universal mesh. Does this mean that like the topology between all the different creatures is the same, or is that some kind of concept of like how you design and develop the mesh?
Yes, so because these animals were so different, we had a topology that tried to match the paws, and then a topology that matched the hooves. And so we tried to get enough span so that he's going to talk more about it, honestly, but I don't want to get too much into his presentation, but that's kind of how we did it, is like we tried, there was like 4 different types of meshes that we used. And then I'll pass it over to him once I show you how we did it. So this is like a bear that was created so that we could try to use this for other creatures that shared the same anatomy structure. And this is how we all kind of worked, is just sharing meshes to like create the new shapes. We don't have to watch all this, so just.
You want to talk about the tools you're using?
Some of the tools, usually, I mean, there's nothing too fancy. It's like the move tool is the most used. I mask and polygroup a lot. I use a tool called my cut tool. It's just like a nice pinch. It's kind of like Damien Standard, but it has a little bit more of a pinch and cave-in. And yeah, H polish I use a lot. And nothing too fancy, really. It's just very simple, keep it simple.
You got another question on the floor in the middle here.
Yeah, I was just wondering, does this mesh contain subtools?
Yes. Yes. Right now, it's just the base mesh, but you know, I'll add eyes, I'll add the clothing, and most of the time when I'm just roughing in something, I'll make everything in ZBrush and you know, mask off the body so I can like create the clothing on him so it matches the form. But yeah, I do use a lot of subtools on this.
Another question right over here, in the middle, over here.
When you are using like universal mesh and you're taking a sculpt and molding it to fit another character that has some similar typology, are you then not going into Dynamesh?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I use the preview smooth a lot because a lot of times when you smooth it or divide it a lot, it'll shrink the mesh. So I tend not to. When it goes into production, I have to do some fixes. I'll take it back and just use the smooth preview instead of actually dividing it.
And also because we have to hit the concept sculpt, but at the end we have to do all the cleanup process. So if we can avoid that extra step, it's going to be faster for us to deliver.
So one question back here by the door while you guys are transitioning to Sergey.
All right.
When you're mixing and matching pieces, like on a pig character, are you doing that in ZBrush? Oh, sorry, back here. Are you doing that in ZBrush, or are you pre-preparing that mesh in another software and then bringing it into ZBrush? And are you stitching the pieces back together?
Me personally, when I'm trying to start a character, I usually mash stuff in Maya, like seam it and everything, and then bring it in and then start my sculpting process there. But some people, I use Modeler a lot, the brush a lot.
We didn't get to clap for Alina.
So,
Hey, my name is Sergi, and well, I came to Disney 3 years ago, so I've been lucky to work on Zootopia and recently on Moana. And we're going to talk about all this process, about the topologies and universal bodies that we use for Zootopia. As I mentioned earlier, in other shows, if it's, for example, Big Hero 6, with all the characters are mainly humans, it's easy to share a universal mesh for all the humans. But in Zootopia, we had some challenges. Like, as you can see here, we have a huge variety of animals. So that means some of them have horns and huge variety. So obviously, we cannot share a unique topology, body topology for all the characters. So at some point, and also not only for the variation on shapes, but also for the variation on scale. Here you can see some of the big characters with some of the tiny ones like Mr. Big or that little mouse. Also, maybe some of the characters were the same species, but we also have to provide variety on ages. So we have some of kids of the animals. So we have to, at the beginning, we had all of these ideas on mind. So what we did was to group our meshes or our characters in kind of different species according to the features that each one will have, like horn or bigger ears, long tail, short tail, 3 fingers, 2 fingers, all that kind of stuff. So at some point we start doing what Alina showed on her first time lapse with the big character, and we group the characters on different species with the different features on the topologies. And also, as you might seen on the characters have like huge, very big amount of topology. Some of them are around 20,000 faces. So that allows us to deliver a huge range of shapes and not getting out of polys to deliver, because as we mentioned, we never go up in subdivision levels, so we always provide the first level of subdivision. Again, another example of the diversity on the characters. On the left, we have the giraffe, and that column on the right, it's the little mouse. So 1 giraffe equals to 95 little mouses. And that idea about sharing topologies, it's not only applied to the bodies of the characters, but we also need to be able to share the same shared topologies for clothing and accessories and all of that. So Zootopia wasn't challenging in that part. So here's a quick quiz to show that process that we were using the same topologies between different animals, and in this case between the different species. On the same species, a male elephant and a female elephant. So let's see. Let's do the quiz. It will blend? What do you think?
You think that's the same mesh?
Do you think that?
Is it the same mesh?
I think it's the same mesh.
Let's see. Yes. Let's do another one. These two guys, both. The guy on the left has a huge nose. What do you think?
Will it blend?
Yep. Will it blend? No. And these, for example, these two guys are very different, not only on head and the tail, the sizes. Lots of yeses? Cool. Yeah, those guys blend. So that proves that we were sharing
Will
this.
it blend?
Oh, no.
Oh, it
There's
doesn't have
no.
yes or no.
But I can tell you,
We were
I
so
modeled them.
So much suspense there.
You pulled them in with the yeses.
So that's an example about the same mesh that could be shared into different species, but also it's an example of how we provide for the approval the characters with a pose or the legs in that position, but then for when we deliver to rigging, we straight all the limbs. And here's another example of some of the bears that at some point appear on the movie. It was they had a kind of big role in the movie too. And these guys share the same topology as Alina was showing with the Kozlov, the big polar bear. And the same concept, we provide the same topology for clothing and all of that. And here's an example of how using the same character and the same mesh, but just with our partners at the look department, just changing the look, the fur, the color, and as a modelers providing different sets of horns, how here you can see the huge variety or huge range of different animal species that we can get. And also here you can see a little bit of all. There's a original concept, I guess, it's from Corey, how Brandon Lawless modeled the center elephant, and then that concept evolved to the yoga instructor that I reused the body that Brandon did, and I did remodel the head. But finally, this character never went into the movie because on the final Zootopia version, there is a female yoga instructor. So here you can see an evolution of the characters during the process. The same for the clothing. We try to reuse the meshes for clothing, and also the look department helps us to provide the different looks and that looks different outfit. And here with the bellwether, you can see maybe the different clothing that she wears during the movie. And also here you have like a proof of concept that if you take a close look, all the animals are sharing the same clothes. The only thing that changed is the color, and that we swap the jersey or the shirt from one to another, and we hide some of the elements, but that's a proof that we can apply that original mesh to multiple characters, even with different sizes. And also it was kind of tricky on this show because we had to model or sculpt all the seams, and it was all a tricky part to how do you create a seam that it's going to work for an elephant, but also it's going to work for a mouse or something a little smaller. So it was, yeah, we had to deal with all that stuff. And this is our amazing modeling team for Zootopia, and the characters modeling team. And that's my presentation.
So we'll take a couple of questions online, a couple of questions here. I'm going to start with an online one. How much of a personal touch do you feel you are able to give to the characters that you build at Disney?
How much?
Anybody?
Sorry?
How much of a personal touch are you guys allowed to give to the characters when you're building them?
I feel like you're expected to. That's part of your job. It's part of that's part of why you're there, is because your sensibilities are respected and wanted in the show.
And then here's another question. When you guys are doing clothing and you're using ZBrush, so Lena, I think this is for clothing, is that just for the look development part of the character design, or is that like that clothing's going in down the process through the animation riggers?
I started in ZBrush for visual development, but it does inform, you know, where things are going to line up on the body and stuff. We try to keep it matching the topology of the arms and stuff. But typically, because we had to share clothing, it didn't really come from ZBrush, you know.
And when you're doing your clothing, do you have thickness to it, or is it just a single plane?
I do thickness.
You do
yeah,
thickness.
for the stylized version.
All right, got a question here on the floor.
Hello. So this is, I guess, maybe a team organization or a division of labor type of question. I was wondering, from concept art or like MVP all the way to finished on-screen product, how many people, you know, have had their fingerprint in terms of like feedback or, you know, yeah, I guess like how many different people have like touched it before we get to see that?
Well, one of the ways that we structure our character teams, what we call them at Disney, is we'll have, you know, designers, the modelers, animators, look people, everyone that's involved in, you know, making that character will get together and meet all the time. So it's a lot of people usually, and you know, ultimately that goes on to be approved by art direction and directors before it finally, you know, gets the buy-off and makes it into the film. But along the process, from initial concept to all the way finished, it's a lot of people that pass through that, you know, they pass through the hands of. So is that?
All right, another question over here, right where the light is.
Yes. You had mentioned, one of you had mentioned that the models that you sculpt on are in the 20,000 range, and you always hand off a low poly version of like the fundamental model. A lot of those characters have like really great like pore level and like wrinkles and stuff. Is that something that's done procedurally? Is that also done in ZBrush, or is that done by a different department? That's my question. Like, do you do the wrinkle skin folds and all the high level detail, or are you concentrating mostly on like getting the essence of the character and the shape and the form when you're developing your models, or is that a different department?
Take that one. Yeah, all the high fidelity detail is typically done in the look department. So we do focus on the main form. If it's something that directly influences the design, so again, back to that minimum viable product, if it's needed to tell the story, then we'll put it in, even if it's temporary, in ZBrush. And then someone in look can either take that and build on it, or they can start over. It's really their choice.
Another question right here.
Hi, yeah. My dream is to work at Disney. I was wondering if you could talk about the process of getting hired, how it works.
You probably want to start a profile on the Disney website and start there.
And no Zach Petrock.
Oh, that's right. You know, I think one thing that really helps is, it seems obvious, I guess, but you really want to look at Disney-style designs and have examples of those in your portfolio. What we really look for are people that understand our process and understand that we work as a team, that we work with that character designer, and most importantly, we don't do most of our own drawings. So we have a character designer, we take that drawing and that's our starting point, and then we work with them to turn that into 3D. So if you can set up something similar in your portfolio or on your reel to show us that you have a good sensibility in the design you chose, and then that you worked to translate that into 3D, that's very important. That's very telling for us, so that's important. And then you want to show some wireframes just so that we understand that you know how to construct these forms. Yeah, but again, honestly, the number one thing we look for is that you can sculpt an appealing character.
Here's an online question from Torben. Are these work in progress images that you're showing up anywhere online? Did you post them on ZBrush or anything? They're wondering what you guys are sharing today, if there's anywhere that they've been posted online as well.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to post some of these. We'll probably create a thread on ZBrush Central as soon as we can get.
And they are nominated for the ZBrush Awards this year, by the way. Several nominations for Disney Animation. Any questions on the floor? There we go. Got a question on the floor.
You guys had mentioned that you had a fairly sizable asset library for the characters for Zootopia. Do you find that that's usually the process when you move to something like Moana that has far fewer characters, or is there a lot more universal topology mesh use for a specific character? I can clarify if needed.
No, I think I can answer it. I think we do have the universal topologies, but as much as we try to not change it show to show, even if, say, if it's a human topology, universal topology, it ends up changing. So we all hold hands as departments and agree, this is it, this is the best ever, we're never going to change it again until the next show starts, and then that conversation starts all over again. So what you typically have happen is that maybe the top tier characters, the first 2 to 3 main characters, are prone to potentially having their own mesh. But then after that, we really look to utilize an existing universal topology for everything else. So the further down the chain it gets, the more we're looking to utilize things like that to make it easier and more efficient.
Got another question back here, way in the back.
Going along with the clothing pipeline, I wanted to ask if you used Marvelous Designer at all for when you're adjusting between characters. Like you mentioned, going from like the larger elephant to the tiny mouse characters, just if it's a part of the pipeline or if it's mostly ZBrush.
Well, it really depends on the show. In some shows, I know that you guys on Big Hero 6, you use Marvelous Designer, but on Zootopia, it changed. It's according to the leads on the sim department, how they want to work through the pipeline. But on Zootopia, what we were providing the meshes, and I know that at some point, if the cloth artist prefers to do their own version of using Marvelous or using the meshes that we provide, it's depending to the production pipeline and also the clothing artist.
There's a question on the floor coming.
Do you use to render before show to the director or inside ZBrush, or render key shot or marmoset before show to the director?
Oh, when we show the characters to the director?
Yeah.
No, everything is just a picture of ZBrush.
Screenshots of
Straight
ZBrush.
shot of ZBrush, yeah. No renders or anything like that.
You just did that to me, didn't you? I'm walking away. Question.
This is probably mostly for Zach. Regarding the MVP, I find that most artists are perfectionists as they create their characters. They love them. They probably don't want to let them go. Do you have any words of wisdom on how somebody goes through those iterations and basically address that handoff?
I do what the old saying is, murder your darlings. Yeah, it's very painful, but I do feel that you have to. You have to let go. It's our entire philosophy as a studio, all the way up through story. You throw these ideas out there, you put your heart into them, you put your best foot forward, and then when it's said and done, if that's not the best end result, it has to go away. So I do feel like with many things, the more you do it, the more you go through that painful process, the easier it gets, and the more value you see from that. So.
Here's a question from online from Adam. What is your advice for a young designer that wants to be part of the industry one day? Are there any tips to success with portfolio? So someone's starting out, they're trying to get in the industry. What would you recommend?
I think if you're starting off the train, I would look into deliberate practice. I think that is a big part of it. I would start pushing now, but understand your goal. And then if you do that the right way, then you will have a strong portfolio. So, Paul, I think we might have to wrap it up soon,
Yep.
if that's okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Disney Animation.
Oh. Thank you, guys.